Welcome, grade 12s. Good day and welcome to lesson 3. So, lesson 3 today is going to give you a little bit of insight on how to unpack a short story, and it's going to give you some practical advice on how to answer questions in the literature paper. Okay, and for most of you that means My Children, My Africa, which is a drama, or a novel, which could be Cry the Beloved Country, short stories and poetry. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to take the doll's house and we're going to unpack that a little bit. Okay, we're going to jump right into it and we are going to start with what is important for paper 2. Right, so what do we do with paper 2? We pay attention to the following, because these are the things that are going to help us to understand what we need to do when the questions start coming. So we look at the character, and what is a character? It's a person in the story or in the drama. Okay, and characterization, what is that? It's how they act and interact with others. Then you've got the narrator and the narrator's point of view. Are they first or third person? And then the style, how is the story written? Okay, is the register formal or informal? Okay, and when we talk about register and being informal or formal, we are not talking about using the words that you use when you talk to your friends. Okay, we're not talking about words that you use, your vocabulary. We are talking about the style of writing. We are talking about the way in which the story is written. Is it written in a formal manner or an informal manner? Then you find diction, which is words that's used, and you find figurative language. So figurative language will refer to your figures of speech that are used in the story. How do they paint a picture? How do they help you to understand, to see what is happening? Then we've got irony, and we all know what irony is. Irony is your 2-mark question, and it's 2 or 0. It is when things appear to be one way, but they are actually a different way, and I will explain as we go along an example of that with the use of a particular short story. Then we've got tone and mood. And what is tone? Tone is how the person sounds when they say a particular thing. And where does that come from? It comes from what they are feeling. So if you feel frustrated, you might sound sarcastic. Okay? And then mood, emotions at the time. Is the mood somber? Is the mood lively? Is the mood excited? Okay? Those are mood words. Then you get your figures of speech and your sound devices. Figures of speech, grade 12, that refers to your metaphor, your simile, and all the other figures of speech, okay, like alliteration, personification, and those things. And then you get sound devices, such as maybe onomatopoeia. All right, so those are just basic things that you need to remember, because those are the types of things that a first additional language paper 2 question paper will have in it. All right, then examination time. It's very important that when you get to your exam and you have your paper in front of you, that you space your answers correctly. So what do I mean when I say that? Well, you need to leave a space between each of your answers, because when your script gets to the marking center at the end of the year, or even to your teacher, then having space between your answers allows for us to see clearly where you are answering which particular question. Write neatly, write legibly, and always follow the instructions provided on the exam paper. Now let me just say a little bit about following the instructions on the exam paper. So at the end of the year, what I've discovered is that, because I mark paper 2, what I've discovered is that learners are so overwhelmed, because in your literature paper, you are going to find 6 questions. Now remember, you have done 2 genres at your school, okay? So the first one will be 2 dramas. Then there will be, 2 novels, okay? It will be Cry the Beloved Country, Jekyll and Hyde. Then you will get your dramas, which is 3 and 4, which will be Macbeth and My Children. Then you will get question 5, which will be the short stories. That will be divided into 5.1, 5.2, and then you get your poetry, which is also divided into your 2 poems. Now, what do you need to do? You need to select only the 2 genres that you've covered. So the paper is out of 70. Okay, now remember this question, that what I'm discussing with you now is your adherence to the examination instruction. You only answer the 2 that you have covered. How do you know that? Your teachers taught you certain things. So the paper is out of 70. You need to answer 2 questions to the value of 35 each. So if you answer the drama, you will have 35 marks, and the drama will be divided into 2 extracts. Okay, so extract A, 17 or 18, and extract B, 17 or 18. Together, those 2 extracts will give you 35. The same with the short stories. Okay, together, both the short stories or both the extracts will give you 35, and together the 35 and the 35 will give you 70. So, please, grade 12, do not ever answer a genre that your teacher hasn't taught you at school. Please do not ever answer more than 2 genres. Also remember that if you answer 2 questions, but they come from the same genre, and when I say that, I mean section A will be your novels. So if you answer 2 novels, you are only going to be marked for 1 of those questions, even though you've answered 2. Okay, so please adhere to the examination instruction, because it is very, very important. And if you don't do that, you are going to shoot yourself in the foot, because you're going to lose half the value of that paper. Right. So we are going to look at how to analyze a short story. Why are we doing that? Because if you are able to analyze a short story, you are going to come across everything that we discussed in the very first slide in terms of the elements of that particular story and how all these things are woven together and how they fit into each other. Okay? And the short story that we've chosen today is called The Doll's House. Okay? So we all know what the doll's house is about. It's about a gift that has been given to these 3 sisters by a woman, and it's placed outside because the mother feels that it doesn't smell nice, the paint, and then it's about class, and it's about discrimination, and it's about overcoming that, and the innocence of children. So there's a whole lot to unpack. So let's start with the title. So what is the title of the story? Well, the title is The Doll's House. Now, when we look at the title, if you remember the previous lessons that we've done, the title gives us insight into a lot of things, okay? So, when you look at the title, this is now the first time or the second or the third time you're seeing this story. This is what I'm asking you to do, okay? Ask yourself, what is a doll's house? Okay? And then, who generally owns a doll's house? What does it mean to have a doll's house? Now, please remember that these questions need to be asked in the context of this particular story, okay? Because who in this particular story owns a doll's house? Okay, and what did it mean to them to have one? So you need to ask yourself, when you see it, the doll's house, what does it mean? What does it look like? Okay, and then from there, now, who owned it? Okay, so those 3 girls owned it. What did it mean for them to have it? It spoke to their class. It spoke to the fact that they were sort of a cut above the rest. Remember, the 3 Burnell sisters owned the doll's house, and the Burnells were the richest people in the little community. And the poorest people, we already know, were the Calvies. Now, when they got the doll's house from Mrs. Hay, what happened? The mother said, okay, everybody can come and view it. It's going to stand outside, though. So Isabel takes up the superior position, and she says to her sisters, I will decide who can come and see, because that's what mother said. Mum said, I get to decide who comes to see it and when they come and see it. Right, so that's now the sort of Isabel's position of authority already. So the doll's house now already, they are rich, but the doll's house puts them in an even more enviable position, because now they've got something that nobody else has, that they can say to other people, you can come and see it. Okay, and remember, these children must be invited to come and see it. They can't just come. So being on Isabel's good side, on a positive side, means you'll get to see it sooner. Remember, the doll's house doesn't even go inside the house. The doll's house stands outside of the house at all times. So now already you are starting to see what the doll's house in this short story represents. Okay, it is a class indicator, and a class indicator in terms of rich people will have a doll's house, and in this instance they are using that doll's house and they are using it to their advantage to lord it over the other children. All right, so that is what you would do when you analyze the title of all of the 8 short stories that you are going to have to read for your final exam. We've done this already with Mrs. Banji with a chip of glass ruby, but now I'm focusing just on the skills that you need to be able to analyze a short story. And you start with the title, and this is how you start with the doll's house. Right, we're going to move on to themes now. So what are the themes in this short story? Well, they are poverty, social class and prejudice, hope, okay, or hoping for change, innocence and cruelty. Now, remember, what did I say about when we find a theme? We ask ourselves questions in terms of who are the characters related to the theme. So when we think about the doll's house, who are the characters that are suffering the poverty? They are the Calvies, the 2 Calvi sisters. Okay, so when we think of poverty, we think of the Calvies. When we think about social class and prejudice, we think about the way in which Mrs. Burnell decided this thing stinks, it must stand outside. We think about Aunt Beryl and her affair. We think about Aunt Beryl and how she chased the Calvi girls out as if they were stray cats, not kittens, stray cats. We think about hope and change. Who do we think about when we hear hope and change? We think about Kezia, okay? Innocence and cruelty. We think about innocence. The Calvies were very innocent, especially our Else. And who was cruel? Aunt Beryl, who was at the receiving end of the cruelty? The Calvies. So when you look at these themes, do yourself a favor, draw a little line and write down, list who the characters are that are involved with that. And I'll tell you why I said that. Because when you are asked a themed question in the final exam, it will be 3 marks, and you will have to unpack that theme. So you will have to say, what does social class and prejudice mean? Who are the people who are involved with it? How do they show evidence of being classist, of being prejudiced, of treating people badly? Okay, so do that. Who are the people? What do they do? That shows these themes, or that shows evidence of these themes. So, how is the story told? Now, how is the story told is also the narrative style. Is it a first or a third person narrator? Okay, and we have to remember, when and where is this happening? What does when and where remind you of? When and where should remind you of setting, which is time and place. Why is it necessary to know time and place? What did I say earlier? If we are not aware of when and where something is happening, then we are not going to understand the way in which people conduct themselves. So, for the purposes of this story, we know that everyone lives in the same sort of little town, okay? But you've got rich people, you've got poor people. So why don't they just go to different schools, or why don't they just live apart? It's a small community. So everyone goes to the same church, to the same school, they use the same shops. But it's important for those who are richer or superior, or consider themselves superior, to show that superiority. So they must have a group of people who are considered the poor. And they decide that because Mrs. Calvi is a washerwoman, okay, so she works for other people, okay, and she, remember, they give her lots of different material. They give her like tablecloths and old clothing, whatever, and she repurposes those things for her daughters. And what they then decide is, okay, so Mrs. Calvi, you and your children are the poorest, and our children will not mix with you. So Why do we need to know that? Why do we need to know that that's been decided? Because if we don't know that the size of the town is small and that they didn't have a choice with regard to where they were going to go to school, then we're not going to understand why everyone is going to the same school. So that's why that is important. Okay, now, the question that you're asking yourself is also, if you look on the screen, when and where and why it's necessary to know that. I've explained that. How does this information add value to our understanding the story? So, if we don't understand that it's a small village in New Zealand, then we are not going to understand that they couldn't go sort of and move to a separate place and go to different schools because the population was so small that it didn't warrant extra schools or another church or another post office. But what it does tell us also is that classism was so rife that even in that small community, it was necessary to make that distinction. Okay, so that is the idea about asking yourself, but now why? Because throughout your reading of the story, you should constantly be saying, why? Because that is what's going to help you to answer the questions better. The next thing we're going to look at is the structure and the development of sort of how the story unfolds. Okay, so, and this basically also just refers to the plot. Now, I told you earlier that the characters are the people in the stories, okay, and that their interaction with other people and their actions are what allows the plot to develop. It drives the plot, right? So, now what does that mean? So what happens first? Exposition, then we have rising action. Remember, exposition is just introduction. So the doll's house comes to the Burnells from Mrs. Hay, and so everybody's very excited about it and they want to show it to people. Then you get the rising action. So every girl comes and they see the house and they admire it, and but the Calvi girls, because they are the poorest of the poor, they are not allowed. Okay? And remember, throughout all of this, Kezia doesn't quite understand this. And that's where the climax happens. Kezia invites the Calvi girls to come and see the doll's house. And what does Aunt Beryl do? She scolds Kezia and she chases them away because their mother's the washwoman. They are the poorest of the poor. And what is the falling action? Lil is very embarrassed because Aunt Beryl chased them away like stray cats. And I'll tell you why I keep saying stray cats. But how else remembers the lamp? So despite the differences in their social class, Els and Kezia are both attracted by the lamp. Now, what does the lamp represent, grade 12? That is a question that you need to ask yourself. Also, when we look at the plot and we look at the fact that everyone who was of the higher class, they kept their distance from the Calvis, but Kezia didn't. Kezia asked the mom, she says, please can I invite them? And the mom's like, no, and you know why, and don't ask me again, I'm just done. And then when she sees them there in the distance, she says, come and have a look. And she looks the little one, Else, she looks at the lamp and she just, she sees the same thing. She looks at it and she thinks this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And that is where the connection comes between Else and Kezia. Now remember, they come from completely different financial backgrounds. But what is the one thing that emerges here? Both of them are drawn to the lamp. So now you ask yourself, why are they both drawn to the lamp? What is the lamp symbolic of? Okay, and we all know that a lamp would represent light in the darkness. It would represent sort of maybe purity or a new way of doing things. And now we look at Kezia and what she's done. She has been the light in the darkness because she's a child. And what does she do? She goes against what her mother says. Now, that might seem like she's disobedient. And she is disobedient. But her motivation is pure because she doesn't understand this whole thing about class and about people being worse or better than one another, about inferiority and superiority. She just sees children like her who she'd like to show the doll's house to. Okay, so in that regard, Kezia goes against the grain of what people expect her to do. What does Aunt Beryl do? Aunt Beryl chases them away out of the yard. And that idea in the text, it says that she chases them away like stray cats. Now, when you think of a cat, a stray cat, then it's not an animal that you would welcome at your house. But we all think the kittens are cute. And we go, oh, they're so fuzzy, they're so pretty. But the text, why would the writer choose the word stray cats and not stray kittens? Ask yourself. That is in terms of, remember we spoke about style and diction. Why those words? Because of the connotation of the word cats. Negative connotation. Kittens, positive connotation. So Aunt Beryl shoos them away like, go, you are unwelcome, I don't want you here. And you can see that image so very, very clearly. Okay, so that's about the structure and about the plot and about Kezia and her interaction and how it drives everything that happens. The next slide I'm going to show you focuses on characterization. And what is characterization? It is the actions and interactions of the characters in the story. Let's have a look at that. So, personality characteristic or inherent value that someone has which they are unlikely to change, and that helps to make an individual into the kind of person that he or she is, okay? And that is determined by what? By what they say, what they do, what they think. So what must you ask yourself? You must ask yourself, how does, and let's just take Kezia so that we can answer the questions for ourselves. How does Kezia behave in situations? So she listens to her sister. When her sister says, I'm telling mommy, or I'm telling everybody when they can come because mommy said so, Kezia allows that. Then she goes and she asks her mother. And her mother says, no, they can't come. But when she sees them, what does she do? Immediately, empathy comes to the surface. And she invites them. What does she do? What does she say? She says, come and see the doll's house. Have a look at it. Now, when she does that, what does it reveal about Kezia? Okay, and you can do this, grade 12, with every single character. Let's just take another example. Let's take Aunt Beryl. So we meet Aunt Beryl, and Aunt Beryl shoos them away, okay? And she scolds at Kezia. But we know that there's a guy called Willie who threatened Aunt Beryl. And now you ask yourself, now, what is the relationship between Aunt Beryl and this guy? Because he's not of their class. And when Aunt Beryl shoos them away, she feels better about herself. What type of person does that? So she's got this dark secret that no one knows about, okay? And in order to make herself feel better about that, she goes and she chases children off the property who simply came to share in the joy of this doll's house. So do you understand how asking yourself, oh, what type of person does that, gives you an insight into Aunt Beryl's character? And you can go down the line with all the characters and ask yourselves the questions about what do they do in certain situations, how do they behave, what do they say, and then finally, well, what does this tell me about that particular person? Okay, I'm going to show you the next slide, which basically just shows you a little bit more about characterization. Now, it gives you the characterization here about all of the characters in this particular short story. So we've got Kezia, who's the youngest Burnell. We've got Isabel, who's the older one, and she's a lot like a mom. Then we've got Lil Calvi, and we've got Else Calvi, and then we've also got the rest of the characters, which is Aunt Beryl, and she's Mrs. Burnell's sister. Let me just say something on this particular slide. So, I've discovered that often learners mistake Aunt Beryl and Mrs. Burnell for the same person. Grade 12, they are not the same person, okay? Mrs. Burnell is the mother of the girls, and Aunt Beryl is the sister. And I get the idea from the research that I've done that Aunt Beryl is the one that looks after the girls. And how did I get to that conclusion? Well, when she catches them in the yard, the two little girls with Kezia, she says, you know that this isn't allowed. We know that this isn't allowed. She doesn't say, I told you that you can't do this. She says, we know that this isn't allowed, which means that I can't allow this and you can't allow this because we have been told by someone that this isn't allowed. And when I come across quite a few answers in paper 2, I've discovered that learners think that Aunt Beryl and Mrs. Burnell are the same person. Please don't make this mistake. They are not the same person. And the evidence is found in the fact that Aunt Beryl says, we know this, we've been told that this is not allowed. Okay, then we've got Mrs. Calvi and we've got Mrs. Burnell. Now, when we look at the characterization of the characters that I've mentioned, I'm not going to go through all of this because the slides will be made available to you. You can simply go and read the story, okay, and take a page and look at what they do and make little notes and then use this slide to see whether or not you are in fact on the right track with your characterization. Okay, so we know, for example, the older sister, she's a lot like a mother. She's bossy. She says what she wants to. She does what she wants to. She takes charge. And we know from Kezia's behavior that she's not that type of person. She is one who focuses on people. She's empathetic. She wants to share. She's innocent. She's hopeful. Okay? And on Beryl, we know, is riding on the back of her position as their caretaker or as their aunt. She probably lives in their house. So she assumes the same type of authority that Mrs. Burnell would, but she also makes sure that she does as she is told. Okay? And then there's Willie, the guy that she's seen, that's from the lower class. What does that tell us about Aunt Beryl? Okay? And then we've got Mrs. Calvi. Now, Mrs. Calvi has said to her children that they are not allowed to play with the rich children. Okay? So she hasn't said to her daughters, listen, fight for yourselves. Go out there and tell them that you deserve to be here. You have a place in the world. Instead, she has said to her children, look, you're not allowed to play with him. Please don't. Okay? Now you can ask yourself, why would a mother not encourage her children to speak up for themselves? Why would she rather say, don't take on that battle? Is she protecting them? Or is she teaching them to be subservient? Okay? And that's open to interpretation for you. As a mother myself, I would say that she was possibly trying to protect them because she knows how venomous the other people, the rich people, the people who have the power in that little village can be. And she was, because of that, she was trying to protect her children by saying to them, look, you know what, just stay away from them. Okay. I'm going to give you a few tips on what is important in terms of what you need to take note of with regard to your analysis of the short story. Right. So, we need to look at things like how the story's been written. How is it presented to the reader? Okay, who's the person that is speaking? Who's telling the story? So that we note in terms of like, are they experiencing what is going on, or are they relaying something that they've seen? Okay, what type of language do they use? How do they speak? Okay, the narrator's point of view, first or third. Okay, in this story, it's a third person narrator, so they are an outsider, so they are sort of looking down on what's happening and they are telling us about this. And when you read the story, it's very, very straightforward. The diction is simple, the style is simple. Okay, so it's easy to understand what happens in the story. So please take note of that. In this story, yes, but in every story. So you ask yourself these same questions each time you tackle one of the 8 short stories. Right, let's look at diction and figurative language in the short story. So now, what is a metaphor? It's a figure of speech that does what? So you've got 2 types of comparisons, right? You've got your metaphor and you've got your simile. Now, the metaphor is a figure of speech that compares two things that are generally unrelated to one another. And I'll explain a little bit further. A simile is a comparison which finds similar characteristics in two objects and compares them. And always, guys, when there is a simile, you are going to find the word as or like. Okay? So a metaphor is a comparison that does not have as or like. A simile is also a comparison, but how do we identify that one? We will find the words as or like in that comparison. Okay? So, we also have examples that are in the short story. Was like a slab of toffee. So is that a metaphor or a simile? You can see it's a simile because the word like is there. Like a nightgown, as if they were chickens. Okay? Now, if you look at what is on the screen and you see all the similes and all the metaphors in this particular story, then you're going to realize that there is a lot of figurative language. So the story is told through pictures. Okay? And what the author has done is, by using metaphors and similes, by using these comparisons, by saying that else looks like a little white owl, okay, and a wishbone of a person. If you know what a wishbone is in the chicken, you know, it's a little with the two bones and the little center in the, you know, the little line, connecting bone in the middle. Then you have an image of what she looks like. So, some short stories, excuse me for that, don't have a lot of figurative language, and some do. And the purpose of figurative language is often to sketch a picture for you. So the author wants you to be able to visualize this. And if you think back to my example, when I said to you, the stray cats and the stray kittens, okay, then you're going to understand what I mean. If you see two cats, you're not going to want to welcome them. But if you see two kittens, although you might not want to adopt them, you're certainly going to want to find a safe space for them, put them in a box, take them to the nearest SPCA or something like that. So the way in which the figurative language is used is so that you can see the picture. Okay, and if, for example, and you'll see this when you go back to the slide, and I'm not going to go there now, I'm just looking so that I can give you examples. Little rats, the Calvies are described like little rats. Now, when we think of a rat, what do we think of? Rats and mice, vermin, just go scurry into the dark. So that is what this author, Catherine Mansfield, wants us to see in terms of how the Calvies are perceived by the other characters in the story. Okay, so who was burning with shame? One of them was Lil was burning with shame. So when we burn, we are warm. Okay, we are probably, our faces are probably so red. So can you imagine burning with shame? Can you imagine how deeply embarrassed she must have felt? How deeply she felt that particular emotion. Okay, so that is how diction and figurative language should be tackled when you are going about your short story analysis. Look at the pictures that are being sketched. Look at the words that are being used. Okay, what's being compared to what? How are they describing people's behavior, people's appearance? And then you list that. And you know what? I physically, when I read some of these stories, I close my eyes and I see the picture because that helps. Okay, we are going to move on to tone and mood, which is another aspect that assists you in analyzing any short story that you read. Okay, so what is tone and mood? So, tone is the quality in the voice that expresses the speaker's feelings or thoughts, often toward meaning the person being spoken. Okay? Now, simple English, what is tone? Something is happening, okay? And you now need to through your words, express what you are feeling without saying, I'm so frustrated, I'm so angry, I'm so whatever. Tone and mood is what is going to reflect what is going on inside of your emotional state inside at that point in time, okay? How do you feel? Now, when you are asked a tone question, then that is what you are focusing on. So you put yourself in that person's shoes. And based on what you think that person is feeling, okay? If the person is feeling shame, the tone will be one of embarrassment. If the person is feeling frustrated, the person might sound sarcastic. The person could also sound frustrated, but the tone comes from the emotion that the person is experiencing at that time. So when you read the short story, okay, and Mrs. Calvi says to her daughters, don't go there. How would she sound when she gives that instruction? When Kezia says, Mum, can I invite the Calvis? And her mother's like, no, you can't. I said no. What would she be going through? Mrs. Burnell, the emotion that she'd be feeling. How would she sound? Okay? Kezia, when she asks her mom, because remember, she'd like to share this. How would she be feeling when she asks her mom, Mom, can the Calvis come? So how would she sound when she asks the question? So in terms of the mood of the person, okay, and the tone of the question, you feeling something? How are you going to sound when you say it? That's the simplest definition for me of how to marry those two things. Right. Now, also, what is important? You get tone, you find tone words, okay? If the tone is mean, scornful, harsh, or whatever, where are they like that in the short story? The girls are mean to the Calvies when they say hurtful words to them. Aunt Beryl uses a mean tone when she chases Alice and Lil from the Burnell home. And the tone and the mood, or the tone will also reveal to you the person's sort of state at the time, mental and emotional state at the time, okay? So, hopeful tone. Kezia and Alice notice the lamp at the same time. And what does the lamp symbolize? It symbolizes hope. Kezia invites the Calvi girls to come and see the doll house. She sees beyond this whole idea of classism, and she feels that everybody should be able to live together. So what type of tone is that? It's a hopeful tone, okay? And then you get mood words such as sad, uncaring, cold, desperate, sympathetic, optimistic, that the mood will be sort of how things are around the situation. So things are happening, and because of that, there's an emotion. But the emotion translates into a sound when you say it. So mood, emotion. Tone, when you say your mood out loud. I hope that explains it, okay? And it's very important now that you understand right now, that you take these things and apply them to each short story that you do. Grade 12, you will have noticed that I haven't unpacked short stories and gone through them systematically. Because you see, at the end of the day, that's not how it works. The short story is there, and it has all this range of elements, and it's got tone, it's got mood, it's got symbolism, it's got figurative language, it's got diction, it's got elements, okay? It's got characterization. But at the end of the day, it's simple enough for you to take the short story, and you have a list of all these words, and simply apply that as the story unfolds. And how do you do that? You ask questions like, who are these people? What are they doing? Why are they doing these things? How do they feel when they do this or say this? Okay? How do they sound when they say this? Why do they do this? So when you read any short story, always ask questions as you go along, because those are the very questions that are going to allow you to come to understand the elements, okay? So imagine you ask yourself a question like, why are the Calvies nasty? Or so, not the Calvies, why are the Burnells nasty, the girls? Why is Mrs. Burnell nasty to these young girls? Why do those other girls treat them like that and say, your father's a jailbird, you're going to be a maid just like your mother? Why do they do that? Okay, and eventually you're going to discover that those girls do it, the mother does it, because they all think that they are better. And what do you eventually come to? You come to the theme of classism, and already by asking yourself why this one does that, why that one does that, you identify sort of a pattern, and you identify the people, and you've identified a theme. Okay, so asking why, what, when, those are the answers that you're going to get to the elements of the short story. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to change it around, because normally when we approach a short story, we already know all of these things and we try and locate it. Okay, I'm suggesting that you go and you ask yourself questions in order to get to the answers. Okay, don't go and look for evidence of what your teachers taught you. Try and find evidence yourself by asking questions. Right, I'm going to go to the final slide. Remember, do not give generalized answers. What does that mean? You cannot simply say, if we look at the story, the title summarizes the contents of the story. What are the contents of the story? What does the doll's house represent? What is it a symbol of? So you need to remember that you need to be specific. Now, grade 12. That is not just that idea of generalized answers. If you are asked a question in the exams, okay, you can't say, she said that. What did she say? Why did she say that? If you are not going to show that you have working knowledge, okay, content knowledge that is related to the elements of the story, then you're not going to get marks. So you can rather give an answer that is longer than 2 or 3 lines, okay, to explain. Because remember, you have to give a motivation for what you are saying. So if we ask you a question in terms of, is the title of the doll's house appropriate or relevant? You can't say yes because it tells us what happens in the story. First of all, yes or no, 0 marks. It tells us what happens in the story. I still don't know what's happening in the story if you don't tell me. So you need to break it down, okay? And you need to do that with every question that you are asked. You must give us evidence of what you mean when you say it summarizes the story, or when you say Mrs. Babji is a loving woman, or when you say Mrs. Burnell is unkind. What does Mrs. Burnell do that is unkind? What does Aunt Beryl do that is unkind? What does Kezia do that is kind? So what am I actually saying? I'm saying, grade 12, that you need to give detailed responses. I am also saying that you need to ground those in the text. What do I mean? Your evidence must come from the text that you have read. Okay? Also remember, if your questions are based on the text in front of you, then that is where you ground your answers. If your questions are based on the entire short story, then that is where you ground your answers. So, in summary, you need to take every short story. You need to ask yourself why, what, who, when. Okay? Then you need to match those answers to the elements, and then you are going to see whether or not you truly understand the short stories. Remember what I said? I've done my lessons in a completely different way, and I've tried to marry all the elements and the exam techniques and tell you the stories all in one, so that you can understand that it is not something that you can just compartmentalize. Because you know what I've discovered? You don't appreciate the story if you go at it purely from an academic perspective. So read the story for enjoyment and ask yourself the why, when, what, how questions. And maybe this time it will make a difference, and you'll discover that you, in fact, do enjoy literature and that you can do well. Grade 12, I have come to the end of this particular lesson. I do hope that you have found something helpful about it, and I hope that you enjoyed the 3 that you have used thus far. There is more to come, and I would advise you to go and look at the rest because they're also going to touch on literature. But for now, thank you for joining me. Enjoy the lessons. Goodbye.